Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are going to get worse before they get better. And that is very much true while the academics are still up to their old tricks. Pretty mad one this week. So, firstly, last Friday, we had the news that dog-free zones will make the outdoors less racist, a study says. An anti-racism report published by the Welsh government, of all governments, looked at reasons why people from ethnic minorities were discouraged from going to green spaces. It's worth pointing out at this point that in Wales is about 90% white British, and even then the other 4% come from white Irish or white other backgrounds, which are effectively generally dog-friendly places, or origins we'll say. So already, as you can see, this is yet another thing that the Welsh government are doing to try and benefit a vast minority rather than benefit the majority. Vast majority, we should say. So the recommendation was included in a report on racism relating to climate change, environment and rural affairs, part of an initiative called the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. And this action plan's come up with all sorts of nonsense, such as Welsh mine museums have been required to find quote-unquote historical injustices to teach, in terms of please find some racism in your history and teach about why it was bad. They also demand blue plaques be put up on National Trust sites and things like that to say, this person was a racist or a slave owner. They're trying to go after William Gladstone because his dad owned slaves, or at least had shares in a company that traded in slaves. They were saying another one of Britain's prime ministers, David Lloyd George's childhood home, had to be decolonised as well. So this anti-racist action plan from the Welsh government basically is absolutely nuts, and this is why it is imperative that Reform do as well as they can in the next Welsh election, because Labour are absolutely crazy. Anyway, the devolved Labour administration in Cardiff commissioned studies from 5 community groups, which it funded as part of its commitment to create anti-racist nation by 2030. Whatever the hell that means. Apparently it means denigrating absolutely everything we love about Wales and its history, ex-prime ministers that live there or were born there, the Welsh countryside, which is very much iconic. You know, I take my dogs for a walk all the time in the Welsh countryside. And now we might need to have dog-free zones for the, 10 non-white people in the neighbourhood. And it's not even guaranteed that they don't like dogs. It's not even guaranteed that ethnic minorities in these places don't like dogs. I need to see exactly what this research said. Two of these organisations, Climate Cymru Ethnic Minorities and the North Wales Africa Society, urged ministers to create urban farming allotments and dog-free areas in local green spaces. Andrew R.T. Davies, leader of the Welsh Conservatives, called the report outdated virtue signalling nonsense that is completely out of touch with the need of the Welsh people. And I actually think that that is a good way to attack this sort of thing now, to be quite honest with you. Now that Trump over in America has absolutely trounced the Democrats and people have given Labour a chance and basically all hate them, we kind of need to start current yearing wokeness, saying it's 2024, we tried this experiment, it failed, come on, let's move past it now. I think genuinely saying that wokeness is outdated is a good attack. It might radicalise them to be even more woke, to try and get more current trending woke signalling out there, which will be a negative feedback loop to make them go more and more and more insane, to the point where everyone just wants them gone. Because there are still people that are quite tolerant about this because they don't know how bad it's got, but saying it's outdated, people are quite willing to say, oh, well, I've not been keeping up on this stuff, I guess it's that bad. So, as as much the Reform person I am, well done to Andrew R.T. Davies, leader of the Welsh Conservatives, for going on that attack line. I think it's a good one. As the debate over the issue intensified on Thursday, the Welsh Government issued a statement insisting there were no plans to ban dogs from the countryside. Which, yes, they published a report, and they're totally not going to do anything about it. It's not like the last times they've had reports published and they have to tell the National Coal Museum to find historical racist injustices to talk about. It's going to be nothing like that. They're not going to act on this report. A spokesman dismissed the suggestion and said it was a complete misrepresentation of the report. The taxpayer-funded research aimed to explain why people from ethnic minorities visited green spaces such as parks in the open countryside, as well as their experiences of climate change. Evidence submitted by North Wales Africa Society included statements from a woman who said they avoided visiting green spaces with friends or family. The report said this was due to feeling fear and insecurity, fear of attack and racism, going alone to the park or surrounding local green spaces. One woman reported feeling unsafe in the presence of dogs without a mouthguard or leash wandering around parks. So effectively here, one woman is very paranoid and the other one isn't used to dogs. Which, again, this is a sample of two people, and the conclusion was, yeah, this is a generalisation of these ethnic minorities. It must be, which I don't buy. Last year, police force in England and Wales recorded 30,539 offences of an out-of-control dog injuring a person or guide dog, up from 25,291 in 2022. That is actually an absurdly large amount. Just to be clear, that is close to 10 a day. Frankly, I need to know how they record those statistics. That just sounds absurd. A man quoted in the report said dog waste contributed to the poor cleanliness of his local environment. I mean, that's just true. Evidence submitted by the community group Green Soul also cited participants' complaints of dog waste in green spaces. Again, absolutely fine. That doesn't mean you need dog-free zones, though. It just means you need to actually find people who leave dog waste about. The Romani Cultural and Arts Company, representing Gypsies, Roma and traveller communities, described dogs wandering freely in parks as bothersome and a source of fear. Gypsies, Roma and traveller communities were bothered about dogs wandering freely. I'm just going to leave that there. Kieran Cymru, another grassroots organisation, did not mention dogs in its submission. Spatial analysis within the reports found that ethnic minority groups in Wales were disproportionately represented in the most deprived areas in terms of air quality, access to green spaces and flood risks. Almost like it's not skilled immigration that we've been bringing in for the past decade or so. The Welsh Government's report concluded the evidence presents a clear picture of inequality of access to green space based on ethnicity. I mean, from the evidence there, no it doesn't. It's effectively a few hypochondriacs, paranoid people, some of whom aren't used to dogs in Britain of all places, complaining that they aren't used to dogs and they're paranoid. It doesn't show that there is inequality of access to green spaces. They have the same access as everyone else. There is a lack of certainty in disentangling ethnicity from a range of other demographic determinants, not least of which is socioeconomic status. Yes, poor people don't have access to these free parks. It added, in essence, this report highlights the need for concerted action by all people working in the environment sector, in its broadest terms, to heed the voices of ethnic minorities in Wales, championing inclusive approaches that foster environmental justice and equitable access to green spaces for all. And the Welsh Government had things to say on this. We are committed to creating an anti-racist nation by 2030. Our anti-racist Wales action plans is built on the values of anti-racism and calls for zero tolerance of all racial inequality. Well, apparently they have to say we're not going to ban dogs, but also we are so ideologically possessed we want to be anti-racist by 2030. That apparently includes banning dogs from green spaces, so I don't believe you're not going to ban dogs, or at least disincentivise people from taking dogs to these green spaces. Sam Ward, head of Climate Cymru, said the comments were submitted to the Welsh Government as part of a national conversation on racism in Wales. Can I be part of this, please? He said, a single comment has been cherry-picked, taken out of context and used as clickbait by certain politicians and media outlets for personal gain. Well, no, if the report concludes that there is racism in Wales and it's causing people not to go to parks, and most of these reports being submitted include dogs are a problem, then that's not being cherry-picked, is it? That is actually quite representative. We need to focus on real issues and not let misleading headlines distract from the fact that racism remains an issue that causes division and suffering for many in our community. Yes, and people keep getting very annoyed that our habits need to change for other people to have, quote-unquote, more access to the green space, when in reality this is also going to mean we have less access to the green space because I won't be able to take my dogs places. Now, I know the Welsh Government says they're not planning on having dog-free zones. However, the Labour government over in Parliament said they weren't going to do a lot of things, such as add taxes to working people, and then they ended up adding a load of taxes to working people, including working farmers after they die. Anyway, tale as old as time, you have a few researchers, probably ex-academics, in all of these quote-unquote grassroots movements, putting absolute nonsense together, and then the Welsh government get it. So people at Guido Fawkes and other media outlets find these reports, find that having dog-free zones might be a good idea in some of these reports, and then Labour lie and say, oh, that was never said, despite the fact it's literally in the conclusion of these reports. Anyway, that was not the worst thing I saw this week. Geology is racist, claims university professor. Queen Mary lecturer links science to white supremacy and colonialism. I'm sorry, that says and colonialism. Now, this is very much my area. For those who don't know, I did a degree in geology with geophysics, and I think to say it's racist has to be literally one of the most insane things I've ever seen in my life. I've been covering nonsense like this for years, and this is the first time I've seen anyone actually unironically say it's racist. I've seen people say aspects of it are racist, such as the Darwinianism in paleontology, but this is the first time I've seen the entire subject be called racist, because at the end of the day, we're just due to lick rocks. That's an awful lot of what geology is. It's literally going out to a field to look at rocks and then writing about them. Exactly how it's racist, I don't know. It's kind of a good thing she didn't say it was sexist, because if that was said, I think I would have gone mad, because geology is one of the most kind of, in terms of the demographics of people who do the subject, equal subject in the sciences ever. Anyway, along with my expertise in the subject, let's see what this absolutely massive brain has to say about geology being racist. The study of Earth's rocks and natural resources is racist and linked to white supremacy, according to a geography professor at a leading UK university. She's not even a geologist. She eats crayons, is effectively what this professor does. Catherine Yusuf, a academic at Queen Mary University of London, said, the hard science subject of geology was riven by systemic racism and colonialism. I mean, with the amount of people in my course who are not white, I would be quite shocked if that was actually the case. She also suggested paleontology, the study of prehistoric life through fossils, was partly to blame for racism, labelling it paleontology. This, by the way, is exactly what I've been saying for quite some time. It's a lot like Hindi Andrews, and the fact that this isn't actually her subject makes an awful lot of sense as to why she's calling it racist rather than her actual subject, geography. But a lot of professors will just say absolutely outrageous stuff like this to then try and get as many bookings as possible, and effectively to sell books, because, believe it or not, next paragraph, in her book Geological Life, all this is to try and sell her book and garner interest in it. And kind of annoyingly, it's worked. The professor argued the extraction of gold, iron, and other metals was racist. She wrote that geology began as a colonial practice. It didn't, by the way. All of geology was pretty much entirely born of looking at rocks in England and Scotland, because and Wales, actually, because the entirety of Britain pretty much has the entirety of geological history throughout it. We go all the way from Precambrian right up, obviously, to the modern Quaternary period. That creates hierarchies, promotes materialism, destroyed environments, and led to climate change. So God knows what the created hierarchies things is. I assume that's to do with paleontology, and obviously the common ancestor idea with hierarchies of species or something like that. Promoted materialism, well, it's a science, so it can only be materialistic. Destroyed environments, actually quite the opposite in my experience, and led to climate change. Again, a large amount of people who work on climate studies and things like that, especially work at the UN, a lot of them are actually geologists, because, believe it or not, when you're studying Earth processes, climate change happens to be quite a big one. And we had entire modules on the environment, climate change, other effects on Earth processes such as the hydrosphere, the glacial sphere, the biospheres, etc. It's kind of nuts to say that geology destroys environments and led to climate change. That is entirely down to what you do with the information provided. And as I say, an awful lot of these geologists, even the ones that aren't on the UN panel, they are researching into actually how to either deal with climate change, or some people are studying how to reverse it. When it comes to destroying environments, as I say, a lot of geology is about how do we extract minerals without destroying the environment. And this is why I constantly say, when people go on about fracking and things like that, they don't know what they're talking about. because a massive field in geology was how do we frack without destroying environments, and it turns out you just have 2 football pitches wide of concrete with a big drill on top, and that can drill horizontally, so you're not putting these platforms all over the place. And in turn, you're drilling deeper than coal mines, and if you do create an earthquake, it's a nothing burger. And believe it or not, the entirety of UK fracking has been destroyed because Americans came over, went gung-ho with it, caused a Richter scale 5 earthquake, which still didn't kill anyone and it barely caused any damage, because they drilled on a fault line. Because, as you will find out if you watch my channel closely, I think American geologists are morons. Anyway, I think that's enough of me complaining about that paragraph. The theft of land, mining and other geological aspects of colonialism led toward the white supremacy of the planet and resulted in geotrauma. Resulted in geotrauma? Trauma of the earth? Okay. Professor Yusuf wrote, she also claimed geology continues to function within a white supremacist praxis. Okay. Demands to decolonise courses led by activist students and lecturers have spread across the UK universities, backed by official bodies such as the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education. My God. The agenda began in social sciences and humanities and is now being applied to hard science and math subjects. It uses critical race theory to support the view that the knowledge studied in universities is male and white and has been used to attain the perpetual Western global domination through racism and injustice. Yeah, I'm not shocked that this geography teacher, which is absolutely not a hard science, I don't care what anyone says, is the way that geology is being attacked like this. I say this all the time at university. It all seems to have stemmed from the chemistry subject when it comes to wokeness in hard science. I noticed it was in the chemistry department where an awful lot of feminist nonsense started propping up, such as posters explaining, oh, this is how women have been suppressed in science throughout the years. And despite the fact that there are famous female scientists that won Nobel Prize, such as Marie Curie for her research into radiation, they used Rosalind Franklin as the example of a woman whose work has been suppressed in the past, and they tried to claim that she was actually the one who discovered the double helix of DNA, when in reality, if you actually look to the original writings of discovering DNA as a double helix, it was Watson and Crick who discovered it using Franklin's DNA X-ray diffraction data, which was actually cited in the original article of their writing on it, as I said. And there's claims that they stole the idea off her and all that, when in reality they did take her data without her knowledge, presumably because they just asked a secretary for it at King's College. And even then, correspondence between Franklin and Watson had been found that they were actually cordial with each other, and there's basically no evidence that they actually stole the idea from Franklin. The thing that Franklin actually did give them the idea for was that the backbones of the DNA had to be on the outside of the structure of the DNA. But it's worth noting that she said backbone, not backbones, which would come into the double helix structure. Anyway, you get the idea. Wokeness has been in these things for close to a decade at this point, probably longer, so it's not really a surprise that now they're just outright saying entire subjects are racist. And as the Telegraph goes through, yes, they capture these institutions and push this ridiculous agenda. So Professor Yusuf's book focuses on geology from the 17th and 19th century. She argued that non-white people have a closer relationship to the land than white people. Okay. Broadly, brown, black and indigenous subjects. I would love to know if the Times uncapitalised the B's in black and brown there, have an intimacy with the earth that is unknown to the structural possession of whiteness, she wrote. Professor Yusuf describes herself on the Queen Mary website as a professor of inhuman geography. The study of rocks was also racialised, according to the academic. To tell a story of rocks is to account for a eugenic materialism in which white supremacy made surfaces built on racialised underground, she wrote. Yeah, there's a few of her lectures that I have taken a quick look at, and it is all as nonsensical as this. I'm not going to take clips off it because after having just read that, I can confirm that most of her lectures pretty much have the entirety of this nonsense just throughout it for an hour. You know, in the old days, I probably would have gone through a whole hour lecture saying stuff on it, but it's all such nonsense, I really can't be bothered putting you through that. But I do find it very funny that the way... What she is really saying here is that white people build things on the surface, whereas black and brown people are basically mole people living underground. That's kind of the implication of what she's just said. Critics last night slammed the decolonisation agenda as anti-scientific and said the exploitation of the land was almost as old as mankind itself and not race-dependent. That is true. Anyway, it goes into other geologists saying that what she's saying is nonsense. I don't need them to tell you that. I know it's all nonsense. But since this is all about a book, we may as well take a quick look at it and have a quick look at a couple of her slides in her lectures. Geological Life, Catherine Yusuf theorises the process by which race and racialisation emerge geologically. Wow, racism is literally as old as the Earth itself. Examining both the history of geology as a discipline and ongoing mineral and resource extraction, Yusuf locates forms of imperial geology embedded in Western Enlightenment thought and highlights how it creates anti-black, anti-indigenous and anti-brown environmental and racial injustices. You will notice a capital B, I and B there for black, indigenous and brown. Throughout, she outlines how the disciplines of geology and geography and their covenants, surveying, identifying, classifying, valuing and extracting, established and perpetuated colonial practices that ordered the world and people along racial axis. I don't understand how surveying the land to identify minerals that are worth extracting, how is that anything to do with racism? Examining the conceptualization of the inhuman as political, geophysical, and paleontological. Conceptualization of the inhuman as geophysical? What the hell do you mean? Geophysics is just when you scan the ground with like a radar or with a magnetometer. It's just a different way of identifying what's under your feet. I don't even know where to go with that. Yusuf unearths an apartheid of materially and distinct geospatial forms. As I say, this whole thing is just absolute nonsense. These are just words that I actually understand from like geology that don't make any sense in these sentences. This colonial practice of geology organised and underpinned racialised accounts of space and time in ways that materially made Anthropocene Earth. For those who don't know, Anthropocene is the current geological epoch we are in, which effectively just means man-made period. At the same time, Yusuf turns to Caribbean, indigenous and black thought to chart a parallel geological epistemology of the earthbound that challenges what and who the humanities have chosen to overlook in its stories of the earth. Just to make things abundantly clear, you basically never talk about humans when it comes to geological history because we are literally a speck right at the edge of the timeline. Why would they ever come up? Ever? By reconsidering the material epistemologies of the Earth and an ongoing geotrauma in colonial afterlives, okay, Yusuf demonstrates that race is as much a geological formation as a biological one. Yeah, just from that alone, I can tell you that this is total nonsense. But this book did get some praise, so destined to be as influential as Catherine Yusuf's masterful first book, Geological Life, thinks with geopower and geontopower. I don't know what that is. In order to open rifts in the racist matrices of time that divide and rank existence, and to energise efforts seeking a more porous, less fungible encounter with subjectivity. What the hell are you talking about? As Yusuf sinks into the archives that compose the history of white geology, she lifts into view a multitude of missing earths, indigenous, black and brown earths. The hell does that mean? Visible in seams of geological ledgers. We must read Yusuf to see what is in front of our blinded eyes. That's from Elizabeth A. Povinelli, author of Between Gaia and Ground, 4 Axioms of Existence and the Ancestral Catastrophe of Late Liberalism. And this is a point that I want to make very clear. This is all a grift from all these people. These people will be cited a few dozen times. They will cite each other a few dozen times to give each other the credentials to then write nonsense like this, to then constantly tell each other, oh, these are must-read books, look, my friend wrote it, so that they can up their sales and hopefully influence more power over these subjects. Whereas, I didn't go through them, but the Telegraph had plenty of geology professors saying this is obvious nonsense. In this groundbreaking book of anti-colonial praxis and that brilliantly excavates the long racialised history of white geology as well as the ghost geologies that are critical foundations of our current and historical practices of extraction. Again, another Elizabeth M. Delury, author of Allegories of the Anthropocene. Again, I mean, that title is less egregious than the other two books. However, I can imagine, given the way that she has written that review, once again, this is someone who is just trying to sell books by saying white people bad. Because that's where we're up to in 2024. And as I say, we need to effectively start saying, no, this is cringe. This is so 2010s critical race theory nonsense. We're moving past this. We're going into the post-liberal era, where we're simply not going to stand for this nonsense anymore that has ruined countries. Anyway, as mentioned, some of Catherine's lectures are up on YouTube, and it is absolutely filled to the brim with slides like this, race urbanism and the coloniality of space. This is in a lecture called Broken Earth and Built Earths, Architectures at an Inhuman Impasse. And these slides don't really get much better. Here's another one, Deep Space Time. There is subsurface resources, extraction studies, subterranean cultural practices, undergrounders' radical revolutionary retreat, / black studies or political geologies, volumetric and depth geographies or human geography, urban strata, Anthropocene studies, that's the least mental one I've seen so far, vertical territorialization, i.e. building skyscrapers, underground as contested state territory, okay, control of surface and subsurface, geopolitics, I give you that, politics of surfacing and narrativizing energy, environmental humanities, again, they do this all the time. They'll mix in some sensible words with some of the most mental ones. Subterranean cultural practices, black studies. Are you saying that black people are mole people? And of course, there is also a slide on reparations and the repair in colonial Earth, with a picture of modern Africa, which at this moment in time certainly isn't colonised, or at least colonised by the West. That is an odd picture to put with that. In another lecture, or chat with Harvard Graduate School of Design, so not even Harvard properly, she was doing a chat called Geologics, Natural Resources as Necropolitics, and has this mental slide in, trying to equate the word Negro, which absolutely is a racial slur, saying, oh look, it's close to necro, which is, necropolis, it's associated with death, so they now have necro with a K, which isn't a letter in either word, by the way, to equal corpse, or obviously black corpse, which is just total nonsense. And of course, this entire talk is about how extracting natural resources is massively racist, and given that black people, according to her, are basically mole people, they actually extract from the earth perfectly reasonably, whereas the white people obviously destroy everything. And apparently that's equivalent to saying necro means black corpse, which apparently comes from white people, despite this fact that this slide clearly only has black people lecturing here. Anyway, after going through the old theory of polygenism, i.e. the theory that different races of humans originated from different ancestors rather than the largely agreed upon monogenism, where every human has a common ancestor, she then complains about people who originally thought up of polygenism, saying, oh, there are mountains named after these people, such as this mountain named after Jean-Louis Agassiz, who was a Swiss biologist and geologist, very much on the social Darwinian side of things, however did massively come up with the idea of glaciology and the fact that Earth went through ice ages, which is a very important contribution to geology, and believe it or not, this mountain is not named after him because he came up with the idea that different races of humans came from different ancestors. But naturally she has to complain about that. Anyway, this is the last slide I'll go through. The whole section here is talking about how American industry is based off the back of black slaves, who obviously are part of the cohort in the mines, digging up the raw materials needed to make steel and copper and other things that help with the industrialization of America. And the thing is that these slides, she doesn't really even touch upon them. She is complaining about that while she has these in the background. She never even mentions this tweet at the Alabama Mining Museum flying the Confederate flag. She never really mentions these adverts of massive white people pulling up steel and starting electricity or what have you. She just says, you know, it's all implied that white people bad, and explicitly they were enslaving black people. The thing is that these adverts look like they're from, you know, the 60s or 50s or something like that. And, you know, even with the modern day Confederate flag being flown there, you know, that picture was took in 2019. This is way past slavery ended. And okay, you had Jim Crow laws back in the 60s in America, sure. I'm not saying everything was dandy, but this is clearly someone who should have been stuck in the humanities, and I guess is stuck in the humanities because she's doing geography, and then trying to push this nonsense outside of a field. And luckily it looks like geologists aren't having any of it, which is exactly part of the reason I made this video. Anyway, I think that's enough academic brain rot for you today. I'm sorry I had to put you through that. If you did enjoy it though, you'll probably enjoy my other work. Tonight it will be a stream over on the Worcester Club, carrying on the Antiquity series. We are still going through the Peloponnesian Wars. Tomorrow we will be doing a newscast covering the last 2 weeks of news, but I think it will mainly be on the farmers' protest that is supposed to be happening tomorrow. And then the stream on Saturday, obviously, will be the Guardian stream as usual. Videos out as and when I can make them, of course. And with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So please, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe, become a channel member, send super chats, super thanks. You all help the channel out very much. And with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.